Bless that farmer boys, Lord.
Bless farmer boys. God, thank you so much.
We are all becoming someone. In fact, one of the best things that you can ask yourself is, who am I becoming? For those of us who follow Jesus, we often refer to this process as spiritual formation. In other words, to become like him, we need to do the things that Jesus himself did. And so today, I want to talk to you about the practice of sharing your faith. Now, by definition, I would describe it as bringing the good news of Jesus through word and deed to those who need it. We might forget, but Jesus preached the gospel. It's one of the main things that the Gospels cover. Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John all talk about how often Jesus brought the good news of the kingdom, the good news that God was here, the good news that life and freedom were available to all people. And he not only spoke it in word, but he demonstrated through deed, through actions, through his loving service, through his compassionate heart, and through his divine power and miracles. Jesus brought the good news. Now, that word gospel wasn't just a religious word at first, it was actually a word of empire. In other words, Christians took a word that was in the secular culture, if you will, and they provocatively restored the word and would use it for the sake of bringing the good news of Jesus, or declaring the propaganda of Jesus, or the message, heralding the message of Jesus. And it's amazing to me that at the end of his life, as Jesus commissions his disciples, his followers, he says, "You will be my witnesses." Meaning it's not so much do you share good news, but what kind of good news are you sharing today? What kind of good news are you modeling in your life? Jesus also said in John 20 that as the Father has sent me, so I am sending you into the world. The Apostle Paul in Colossians 4 encouraged the church there to pray that a door would open so that he might share the good news. And then he goes on to say to make sure that our speech is always seasoned with salt, full of grace, so that we might be ready to give an answer to people, right? And so this idea and practice is deeply rooted in the life of the Christian. And here's why we need it today, because the truth is everybody is already sharing good news. In other words, everybody is already preaching a gospel. The good news of cold plunging, the good news of retiring by the age 40, the good news of going on 3 vacations a year, right? There's always some kind of good news. You can walk the mall, see an advertisement of your favorite celebrity wearing, a good perfume or cologne. And the good news there is that there is a pathway to take. If you buy this item, you will get the promise of this kind of life. Good news is everywhere. We're already all sharing it. The question is it the good news that actually leads to life? That, of course, leads us to 2 other things. When it comes to good news, we're oftentimes paralyzed by how to share it. In other words, we're scared about fumbling. Maybe you've tried it before and you've messed up. What if you bring the good news to someone and they got a question for you that you don't know how to answer, right? We get paralyzed at the thought of actually speaking and sharing our faith, especially in a world where it's just an unpopular thing to do. And in the words of Mean Girls, that would be committing social suicide. But not only are we paralyzed, we're also put off by the idea of it. Chances are very high that you have seen someone in your life or on the street trying to share good news or share their faith in a way that's demeaning, manipulative. They use tactics that are judgmental or pushy, right? And so we're just put off by this idea. And so let's end by talking about how we might actually begin and bring this practice to life. And that first begins by realizing that this practice is much less of a technique and more of a posture. Meaning the first thing that I want to encourage you to do is to show up in your world as a loving friend. Show up to your relationships. Show up to your family members. Show up to your coworkers as a loving friend. Imagine you becoming the first Christian that your friends ever liked. This is what Jesus modeled. He embodied the incarnation, right? That is to say, he showed up to the world. As the Father sent him, so he is sending us. And so, number 1, show up and become the first Christian that your friends actually like. Secondly, as you show up, begin to identify the cries of those around you. In other words, we all kind of live in a world where we project a version of our life that's essentially a facade. And so through the power of the Spirit as Christians, we can begin to discern the cries of those around us that goes kind of beneath the surface. And so through prayer and God's help, begin to identify what are the cries, what are the longings of the souls of those around you. Thirdly, as you begin to identify those things, you show up as a loving friend. To the degree that you've earned the right to share, you now begin to listen your way to the gospel. Here's what I mean by that. Every single one of us, whether you are a Christian or non-Christian, will experience the 3 T's in life: tension, trauma, or transition. So everyone you know is maybe handling some kind of tension right now. They're navigating some kind of trauma in their life, or they're going through some kind of transition. And so as you listen your way to the gospel, you might begin to patiently hear what your friend or family member is going through, and then begin to apply the good news of Jesus to that. And so as you think about someone's pain or someone's big transition in life, you think, man, Jesus has a word for that. Can I share a story of his life that might help you? Right? And so rather than just kind of jumping the gun and thinking what they need to hear, you listen your way to the gospel. Fourthly, you provide space for an invitation to respond. The good news, as it's declared, calls for a response. Now, you might be surprised where people are at. Remember the words of Jesus, the harvest is plentiful, meaning people are ready. The surprising work of God is that there are a lot of souls, their cries, their longing, they're ready to respond to the gospel. And so provide an opportunity for people. Hey, would you like to respond? Would you like to give your life to Jesus? Can I pray for you? Right? Provide space and freedom to how people might want to respond. Maybe they have more questions. Maybe they're finally ready to go to church with you. Maybe they're willing to have a meal with you and explore more of these Christian ideas. So create space for them to respond. And lastly, as I said, this is a practice. So imagine that J curve that we've been talking about. That J curve says you always will get worse at the practice before you get better. And so you'll start to share your faith. You will fumble, you will mess up, you will be clumsy, but guess what? At some point in your life, somebody fumbled their way through sharing the gospel, and God used that imperfect thing to transform your life. It led you to faith. Like, you are a Christian today because of the fact that somebody else put this into practice, even imperfectly. And so give yourself grace. It is a practice. But lastly, remember that sharing our faith, the practice of bringing the good news, is not about taking God where he's not. It's about joining him where he is already at work. You and I don't take God anywhere. Rather, we meet him where he's already at work in the lives of other people. And because of that, I'm reminded of the words of Jesus where he told his disciples, on that day when you share, don't worry about what you will say. My Spirit, the Holy Spirit, will empower you with the words you need. This practice is ultimately a participation that we join in with God. And so may you go with all of God's grace and peace, and especially his Holy Spirit, as you begin to practice sharing your faith. Grace and peace.
Yeah. You don't want to disrupt the beehive.
No.
Nor do you want to just